G'day everybody, it's great to have you here today to hear about biogeochemical modelling tools and applications. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. Here in Hobart, that is the traditional and original owners of the land, the Muwinina people. And I pay my respects to those that have passed before us and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community and the custodians of the land, the elders past and present, and the elders of the various lands we individually meet on today around Australia and potentially around the world. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here today as well. So this is the third webinar series for 2021, and I'll give you a little bit of a discussion about that. So if you could hit me the slide, please, Leslie. The purpose of the CRC is to perform world-class collaborative and particularly industry-focused research. So it's exciting research, but it's being directed by industry so that we have the underpinning science and the underpinning training to grow the blue economy, particularly in the areas of aquaculture and renewable energy, so that we can effectively launch those industries going forward over the next decade. Next slide, please, Leslie. That involves collaboration amongst, I believe we're at 40 partners over 10 countries, so it's quite a big community, and we're always happy to work with others beyond that immediate partnership as well, but it is a lively community, and I hope a number of them have got on today to hear about biogeochemical modelling and what it can do for them. Just a little tiny bit of housekeeping first. I think we're all getting fairly used to Zoom, but just in case you're new to the process, to ensure that you can see both the presenter and their slides, it's good to have the view as in speaker view. So that way you can have the little person up the top, though in Karen's case, she may look like she's not paying attention because it's on a different screen. Don't take it personally. She is trying to do her best. We encourage lots of questions through the Q&A function. Please don't use the chat function. That's only if you've got any technical difficulties. If you are stuck, put it in the chat and our technicians will leap onto it to get you fixed up straight away. When we say technicians, it's probably Leslie and I, so sorry if something doesn't quite work as anticipated, but we'll do the best we can. But yeah, Q&A function is the best way, and just if you have a similar question, just upvote the question that's already there. Otherwise, bung in a new question and we'll try and get it all fit in the question and answer sessions. Some of those will be by text and some of them will be live, but hopefully we get everybody covered. Next slide, please, Leslie. We have two great speakers today. One is Louise Bruce from BMT, who's going to tell us about the biogeochemical modelling tools from BMT and how they can help support sustainable development goals. And then Karen Wald-Allen's going to share with us some work that the CSIRO and Chile have done collaboratively around decision support tools for sustainable aquaculture. So they're both really great and hands-on applied tools, which I think is a great way of demonstrating what biogeochemical modelling can do for us. Next slide, please, Leslie. I think this just lays out a little bit of the time frame, but basically it's Louise first with a quick Q&A in between and then on to Karen with a Q&A at the end. And like I said, if there's any questions that I won't cover, we'll probably actually follow up by email as well, but make sure you bang those questions in. So without further ado, let's start. So over to Louise, please. I think you've hit mute twice there, Louise. You're still on mute. There you go, all grown.
Okay. Okay, I can actually see they're on my controls are on the other screen. So thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction, Beth. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners that we share this land with, and elders past, present and future. I'm going to be talking about the biogeochemical modelling tools that we use where I am at the moment, but the ideas and the presentations and everything that's coming through this is part of a much larger team of aquatic biogeochemical modelers that I've been part of in the last 25 years. So I'm sort of acknowledging the team that I work with at the moment, but at the end on the final slide, I'll put a much bigger call out or shout out to everyone else who has contributed to this. So what I'm going to do today, I've just realized I haven't hit activate on my stopwatch. There we go. I've got 20 minutes. I'm very passionate about biogeochemical modelling or modelling in general. So I've got to be very careful to stick to time, but I'm going to give you a very rough overview of where biogeochemical modelling has come from, what it is, like a bit of a definition, and then go through why we use these models, particularly in the blue economy, while going through some case studies, and then where we're going to go in the future. So background, we talk about sort of where we are now, but really for thousands of years, the First Nations people here in Australia have practiced aquaculture for thousands of years. That sort of knowledge that has come from that has led to all sorts of tools in terms of trapping, harvesting, storing the fish and shellfish, eels, different multiple species. And they've been designed also for different operational practices, but also in response to seasonal change and protection against extreme events. So all that knowledge has actually been around for thousands of years. The other little bit of history I always love to bring into modelling, particularly water biogeochemical modelling, is Hildegard von Bingen, almost 1,000 years ago. She made a few statements, a lot of things. She published a lot of work, but the three things I've just kind of highlighted today. So first, her first comment there, which is where she looked at she actually predicted that whales will respond to environmental cues. So that's number one. The number two, where she looked at different trophic levels. So the different trophic levels and the interaction between them. And number three, which is what I really like there, is this prediction: if you have that top-down control removed, there's going to be a response. And that's what biogeochemical models are all about. What is the cause and what is the response? I'm talking here about a revolution, evolution and revolution. We've come a long way from the observational inferences that Hildegard made 1,000 years ago. We've really picked up on this sort of whole quantitative analysis where we start to really understand what's going on. Improved field instrumentation has led to this an ability to have these complex coupled models and complex algorithms within those models. Increased speed, computational power has led to this sort of whole concept of machine learning, deep data, parameterization of our models. Where we are now is what I like to call this revolution, and it's not like it started in the year 2020, but the year 2020 did bring the world together via Zoom, via webinars like this, and really helped to enable these collaborative networks, and then led it to more complex parts of, more levels of complexity in terms of your collaborative, your decision support system. So what is a biogeochemical model? Put very, very simply, it's biology, geology, and chemistry. And I've got the blue economy there here because what I'm going to be talking about today, obviously biogeochemical models cover a lot, but I'm going to be focusing on the renewable energy, the seafoods and marine production, and the offshore engineering. So I'm going to be focusing here on the marine environment. So physically, you have your currents, your waves, and your tides pushing the water around. You have your heat cycle, and you also have your salinity, your stratification, and your sediments, movement of sediments as well. Geochemical, you've got your dissolved oxygen, the cycles between carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, both organic and inorganic, and then you've got the geochemistry as well, heavy metals, all sorts of things there. Silica, iron, very important. In terms of biological, typically you have your phytoplankton, your zooplankton, your fish, seagrass, corals, benthic fauna, parasites, pathogens. I put here marine mammals. I was questioned, is that really a biogeochemical model? Is a biogeochemical model is what we're bringing into, again, it's about how these models are used to show patterns of behaviour. So where marine mammals or whales, for example, can respond to environmental cues, the biogeochemical models is a tool by which aids in our understanding of where that's coming from. Simply, it's a link, a dynamic link between the physical, chemical, and the biological oceanography, and that's really important. These models are there to link those different areas. Exploring the cause and effect pathways, this is why they're so important to us. Also the community impact assessments, and that's really important, and I'll come into some of that in the case studies. I like to think of models as being an integrator. These models are an integrator between the data, the knowledge, and our understanding. And it's that integrator of biogeochemical models which can then lend its hand to supporting sustainable development. This is just showing you the different levels of complexity. Where we are at today, or what we're describing today, is the one on the end, this integrated model. So there's a whole series of models that you can use, from conceptual models, empirical models. They all have a 1D, three-dimensional hydrodynamic models, but it's once you put the biogeochemistry in it that you really start to understand that increase of complexity, understanding and knowledge, which is leading to improved decision making, and that's what it's all about there. Again, this is just for those who are familiar with biogeochemical modelling, and the life cycle of a biogeochemical model would be very familiar with this. But put very simply, when you have a problem or a request, you need to understand a system. For example, what is the impact of my industry on the marine environment, if that is your problem? You then put together a conceptual model, and that conceptual model brings all the different aspects of your marine environment together. And then you've got to go through that cycle to make sure that that conceptual model is actually practical. Once you've got that design, you set your model up. And the reason the calibration part is in pink, because that is central to everything. If we're going to be making predictions about the future or predictions about your impact, we need to have we have to have trust in what our model is telling us. And that's why for most projects, you will actually have 90% sometimes of your project going into that, building that trust. And of course, you'll have that cycle back, because if you can't calibrate your model, there might be something wrong with the conceptual model, and you go cycling back in your model design. Once you have that trust in your model, that calibration, you can then start to put some scenarios together, these what-if scenarios. And of course, you present that and you make your decisions. We often describe biogeochemical models as a virtual laboratory. So it's where you can play around in the numerics and the algorithms of describing your biology, geology, and your chemistry and your hydrodynamics, without actually having to go and build a big laboratory a physical laboratory to mimic those. I should say that the virtual laboratory that we build as part of biogeochemical models is built on the depth of knowledge that has come through physical monitoring and physical laboratory studies. And it's taking that and putting it into this virtual laboratory. So a few case studies, keeping an eye on the time. Midwest, so in Midwest of WA, we developed an integrated scientific data innovative ecosystem model. So what happened is, back in 5-10 years ago, a decision was made to develop aquaculture off the coast of Western Australia and dedicate aquaculture development zones. And so the investment was made into building this innovation model. And the innovative model combined the biology, the geochemistry, the sediment diagenesis, and the hydrodynamics, particle tracking, and put it all together and integrate it. It enabled us to support that environmental impact assessment. So looking at the impacts of infauna, sediments, water quality, and recovery times during fallowing, and that was really important. So we could put those maps together. It meant that we could come through with a carrying capacity for upper limit of production, and then the aquaculture development zone was declared open for business. That same tool can then be used for planning, monitoring, program design, and in the future, that same model for operational planning and response, and it's also being applied for the Geraldton Marine Fish Nursery environmental impact assessment as well. And so I think I've gone through a slide. I've missed a slide. Anyway, so this is the, I think hopefully you can see now the, yep. So in Abu Dhabi, the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi works as all environmental agencies do for the protection of the environment and the promotion of sustainable management practices. So they approached us and they asked us if we could build the internal capacity for the development, use and interpretation of hydrodynamic and marine water quality models. So through that, we've developed a whole heap of training, workshops, webinars and tutorials, and developed also this calibrated coupled biogeochemical models of the region. And then went through a whole heap of case studies to work through the capacity building. So I'm just going to show you the 10K or the 9 case studies. We're up to 10 now. I'm not going to go through detail every one of these case studies, but I wanted to show you this slide because you can see all the different types of industry that by this one biogeochemical model adapted can be used for. So all the way through from the aquaculture, wastewater treatment plant, management of development of island resorts, through desal discharge, port development, looking at algal blooms on public beaches, the site selection for pearl oyster farms, and also the fate and transport of heavy metals throughout the environment, as well as a sea level rise and coastal inundation risk assessment. So the one that I'm going to show here for you is the one for Delma Island aquaculture. Again, very similar to the Midwest. The same model was then applied to determine a sustainable carrying capacity for the aquaculture development zones. So we looked at different levels of production and which of those levels of production could maintain that sustainable development levels to make sure that the impact of that, of the aquaculture, would be within the sustainable or the water quality guidelines and limits of the environment, and would then lead to that sustainable development there. The other model that we've used, and I just want to go through again, we had a number of different studies in the same Abu Dhabi model. So we've got a nested model here for Abu Dhabi marine area around the city or the island there. For wastewater treatment outfall, there was a fish kill event that we explored, also desal plants and dredge operations as well. I'm focusing in on the fish kill event. So there was an event where there was a number of fish that died of different sizes. We needed to know the principal cause of that, the location of where that event happened, the timing of the triggers that led up to that, and then we needed to propose some management options to mitigate this happening again. So what we did, we looked at did a forensic analysis, and this was really interesting to try and do the reverse particle tracking to understand if the dead fish have turned up at this beach, whereabouts did they start from? We also did particle tracking from alternative locations to try and find out that probable source. We also then went and did some flushing studies in the area where the main fish deaths occurred. And then the next step is to do the water quality modelling to investigate the dissolved oxygen eutrophication and algal blooms as that cause. So I'm clicking too fast here. So we used the biogeochemical model as a virtual laboratory. And that meant that we could look at integrating engineering and biological solutions. So we found that flushing can be improved with engineering design solutions, and that would then lead to that reduced fish deaths. So we focused on what it was. We learned through our modelling that we need to focus on the source of the problem as well as the impact. So we know that anoxia, which is what was causing the fish deaths, but it was the wastewater treatment plant which was discharged further downstream, which was causing that anoxia. So it wasn't just focusing on the fish, you had to go right back to the source of that problem. And we combined different scenarios. The animation that's showing in the top right corner there is different scenarios looking at flushing. And we discovered that the fountains would give you the maximum cost benefit of increased flushing, increased oxygen, and then reduce the prevalence of anoxia in those channels. What we also found through this, and this is why the capacity building program is such a beneficial one, it was the local knowledge which was key to driving that modelling solution. So it was the team over in Abu Dhabi that we worked with to give us those solutions as well. Another example here is in Coburn Sound, closer to home. So we've got a complex, multi-stakeholder, multi-use marine area. So there's industry there, huge lot of industry. There are ports, there's recreation, there's fisheries, there's water utilities, aquaculture, and even a navy. So the biogeochemical model we developed here, it integrates the hydrodynamics, the water quality, and particle tracking. It is linked the near field CFD with the far field three-dimensional model, and this is really important when you're modelling outfalls. So, and again, going back to the slide I had before when I talked about that calibration in the middle of that life cycle of the development of biogeochemical models as being so critical, is that the calibration validation, which is really important, it went through an extensive review process. That extensive review process went through, and I was privileged to be part of, and I should say a lot of this modelling was not done by me. I'm just working through what my colleagues have done. But I was privileged to be there with that review panel when it was delivered. And one of the reviewers said this was a declared this to be a state-of-the-art model. And that was really, as modelers, biogeochemical models, really satisfying to hear that. The review process was very difficult to go through, but it meant that the end product was something that you could trust. It also meant through that process, we've got some characteristic climatic conditions, and this is really important when you're doing your planning, that you have climatic conditions that can go through different events. So whether it's summer, winter, poor flushing, high cyclonic activities, whatever is important to your design. This same model has been developed with modifications, particularly around the mesh resolution, for the desalination and emergency discharges, the impact of alternative channel and port shipping channels and port design options in terms of its impact on flushing and water quality, planning for coastal infrastructure, jetties, wave breakers and the like. Also, and that's what's really interesting from this animation here for fish spawning as well. So this is going back to biogeochemical models can be used not just for the biology, the chemistry and the geochemistry, but also for the for those smart particles and responding to environmental cues. So enabled us to do targeted environmental management, going through the future-proofing your environmental ecosystem restoration, risk mitigation, and so forth. And this is what was, again, because of the integration of this model for sustainable development, cumulative impacts with all the different types of industry and different multi-stakeholders, catchment management and climate change, etc., those sorts of things. So that... Okay, so we have here my last case study. I've got 3 minutes. So we've got in Scotland, they have a $1 billion industry for salmon in aquaculture. They can lose up to £200 million, pounds per year because of sea lice. They want to double their production targets. So the Scottish government is looking at, here we go. An innovative solution. So we know we have some problems with our salmon. We know that they are getting infected by sea lice. We want to know what is going to be, how do we de-risk investment in doubling our production? And what's really important in Scotland, it's not just about trying to reduce the impact of the sea lice in terms of your productivity, so your economic solution, but it's also the environmental impact as well, because a lot of the treatment for sea lice can be quite have an impact on the environment. You can sort of see from the schematic up the top that you've got your salmon and your sea lice, and you've got your bath treatment happening there, and they all have an impact. You've also got your eutrophication of sediments through the waste as well. So this partnership that we formed between the fish farmers, the scientists, the regulators and consultants meant that we could tap into 20 years worth of knowledge and scientific knowledge, operational data and model development. So not only were we tapping into the science knowledge here, we've come into this with 20 years worth of model development that's going on. So we've done a 12-week sprint. So we have this integrated model. And what we are looking through now is we're doing that virtual laboratory. We're looking at different treatment practices and comparing the environmental impact and the cost-benefit analysis of different treatment practices, not just in the volume or loading of the treatment, but alternative treatment methods like your feeder fish compared to your bath treatment, compared to your feed treatment as well, and where we're targeting that to. So the timing of the treatments, the location of your sites is all about going towards aquaculture industry, towards this beyond compliance in terms of their environmental impact. So where's the future going? And this is the segue into what Karen's going to be talking about. is that we're going even further. We've got better instrumentation, video captures, drones, remote sensing. Our models are getting more sophisticated, the auto calibration, machine learning in terms of parameterizing them. Our particles are doing really smart things like responding to cues and also feeding back in terms of your oxygen consumption, for example, of your fecal waste back into the water quality models. So we're working towards this near real-time forecast where we integrate the data, the weather forecasting into our modelling as well. And then we can also do the climate change risk assessment. So if you are wanting to invest in aquaculture in a particular area or renewables, and I should say a lot of mine has been about aquaculture, but renewables equally so. You need to know what is the environment going to look like in 20 years before you put your investment in. So de-risk investment using these modelling tools. These integrated platforms is really important as well. High performance computing, fast cloud computing, GPUs, are all helping us to get more complex and be able to solve some of those bigger complex ones, and then going into your decision support systems with the interactive web-based software. So greater insights and understanding leading to informed decision making, and that's what it's all about. So I'll just finish here where these integrated solutions and the predictive scenario design planning. So before you do, when you're looking at your investment and you need to know what are all the different things that are going to go on, not just when I invest today, but in 20 years in the future as well. But then once your operation is up and running, you need that near real-time forecasting response. So this is where the integrated data management, for example, your meteorological forecasting in with your biogeochemical model. So it gives you that decision support system and you can make decisions about your operational practices on the fly to as you go. So I think that's just gone a minute over. So I think that's now for me. I'll just here we go. Sorry.
That was great, Louise. Thank you very much for that. We've got a question that's already come in for you. Peter Longdill says, it's a great question, thanks. And what type of metrics are you able to apply to use, determine and quantify in particularly the model performance?
Yes, so that's probably a $1 million question there, and we keep going back to fit for purpose. So the answer to that question is depends on your application. So, for example, if you just want to know, is it going to be too warm for my my trout or my yellowtails in 20 years' time, then we can sort of get a very sort of rough indication of what's going on. If you want to know that if you've got a coral habitat, for example, right next to your aquaculture operation, you're going to go into a lot more depth as to making sure your model is giving the right prediction, because you do not want to put aquaculture in there and find out that once you start operating that coral is impacted. So the answer to that is dependent on your level of impact, and also what are the different cause effect pathways you want to go. But your very simple answer is so you start with your physics. It's so important to get your physics right. So you put your ADCPs out and you make sure you got your currents and your temperature salinity right, and you need to make sure you've got that right for a whole different set of climatic conditions. You know, like you're planning for your neap spring times and also your seasonal changes. One model that we've got up in the far north of Western Australia, where the tides are 10 metres, you've got to really make sure that you've got those currents right. And then you start looking at your dissolved oxygen. It's from the next level up. Make sure that you've got all the sources and sinks there managed properly, so that you're reproducing that and making sure that the impact of, and again, I'm going back to aquaculture. Once you start going back to the physics, it's really that there too. Then you start looking at your what's really important to get your nitrogen cycles right, so make sure those metrics are there. And then you go through your algal blooms are also really important to make sure that you've got your phytoplankton, your triggers right there too. So those are the sorts of if it's an aquaculture operation, those are the sorts of metrics you'll be using in terms of ensuring that you've got both seasonal changes reproduced. And that's what I was talking before about Coburn Sound, when you've got your different seasonal changes and making sure that you can reproduce that. Your tidal cycle, making sure you've got that right, and you've got your patterns of, as I said, this I could go on forever here, but I think that gives you a little bit of a flavour for the sorts of metrics that you would be, and when do you decide it's performing adequately? That's when you need to bring your peer review in, because they're the ones who would go, these are the experts. I'm a modeler, I can put numerics into anything and I can tell you anything, and I go like this, but you need someone to come in and say, this is the science. This is what this environment is telling me. And I understand this environment. This is why local knowledge is so important. You keep coming back to us and as modelers and make sure that we are reproducing the knowledge that you've got in your site. I see some other questions here. So I've got.
So we can take one more question, then you might need to answer the others as a chat while.
Sure. Okay, so this is a good question. I'm just looking at the climate change risk assessment. So yes, the answer to that one is, the question is whether you can just get insights just on the temperatures, but also can you do it in the biology, ecology? You can get meaningful insights. We talk a lot about the all models are wrong, but some are useful kind of quote. So I wouldn't be able to predict to you what are the chances of an algal bloom happening in your area in 20 years' time to any degree of accuracy, but it can be useful. So we can change the temperature as far as the IPCC projections are in your area. Then we can sort of say, okay, what are the catchment management practices that are happening that's maybe going to change the terrestrial nutrients, and we can also look at some sort of global circulation models to find out what kind of, say for example, if you're offshore, what kind of nutrient upwelling that you'd be expecting in 20 years' time. You put all that together and yes, you can answer those questions about the biology and ecology, not just about the physics as well.
That's great, Louise. I think you've covered an enormous amount of territory in a very rapid but informative way.
Thank you.
We might switch over to Karen now to catch up on what happened in Chile.
So I should share my screen now. How's that?
Yep, looking good, Karen.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for having me on this webinar, and thank you very much for Louise giving such a comprehensive introduction to biogeochemical modelling and showing us some really great examples of their diverse portfolio of projects. So my task is a little bit easier, but it's also because I've just selected one project that we've recently been working on. However, it was also a very diverse project, and this is the work that our project teams did in Chile recently. It was a significant project led by Andy Stevens, who is was until recently the research director of our coastal business unit. Had over 30 scientists, and including 5 in our CSR office in Chile. And we have many partners and collaborators to work with from in the universities and everything over there. So this is at least a 3-year project. I think it may have been a 5-year project in the end. I'd like to give you a summary of the tools that we've developed to help the Chilean salmon aquaculture industry to improve their sustainability. So it's interesting. I've lost control of my. There we go. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge all the partners in Chile, including the government departments of Sana Pesca and Subpesca, and then the numerous universities, research institutes, and industry people who helped and were involved in this project. So for a research context, why was our CSIRO Australian team working in Chile? Well, we'd just come off the back of providing or developing this fantastic modelling system in Queensland for the Queensland shelf and the Great Barrier Reef. And we realised there was an opportunity to develop these tools more and invest in them in South America and help with this question of sustainability for the salmon industry. And since that project, we've then been able to step up and bring some of those tools that were developed in Chile back to Australia, which are now being deployed in Tasmania. So in addition to the biogeochemical models, which were, and the hydrodynamic models, which are in this components, there was a need to deploy more ecological systems knowledge, to look at farming models and risk assessments. So all these components were then integrated into products and services for the Chilean government regulators, so that they could really reflect on their strategic planning and their tactical response planning to incidents and their forecasting. So that's why we had such a large and diverse team, and it was really an ambitious vision to synthesize these science components and deliver something that was meaningful for industry. So as I mentioned before, that there was this definite focus on sustainability, social ecological modeling, economic modeling. It brought together the local data sets and information together with production modeling, biophysical modeling, and synthesize this all. And the vision was not to deliver a whole bunch of reports, but to deliver an information system that could be used by managers on their fingertips, on their computers. So this is the platform that resulted from the project. And the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk you through some of the content in this platform. We've only got 40 minutes, so, and there's a great depth of knowledge here, of which I only know a fraction, but I'll try and do my best to give you a high-level summary, and then we can try and address some of the questions, or I can put you in touch with the actual experts who develop these components if you have further questions. So I'll start by talking about the risk assessment and strategic assessment tools. Then we might have a look at some of the model outputs and the connectivity modeling. And then finally, I'll show you some of the ways we were able to build systems that managers and stakeholders could actually access the information and get it onto their desktops, to their computers, and how they could use this tool in their day-to-day work. So let's have a look at these risk assessment tools. So the ambition of this tools was to develop a sort of a range of risk assessment systems to allow the analysis, firstly at the simplest level 1 of qualitative risks to salmon production, and then right through to the most comprehensive quantitative risk assessments, and looking at scenarios and trying to do a bit of crystal ball gazing and to prepare the managers for what might happen in the future in terms of their risk profiles. So for the qualitative risk assessment, this is based on, as I understand, and this is part of Beth's research group leadership, so she'll hopefully be available to answer some questions if you have any on these topics. This is based on a number of workshops held with a range of stakeholders, and they were asked questions and in group discussions to identify the range of environmental and economic and just things that might happen that could have an impact on the salmon production. So, and then those causes and factors were ranked, and so that you could identify by this expert knowledge then was drawn out, so they could identify the most serious risks and the highest probability ones, and then those might be the ones that people would invest further in to make sure they had a good strategic plan or tactical plan to respond to those risks in case to mitigate a catastrophic a disaster. So the level 2 quantitative risk assessment then started to incorporate data. So that maybe some monitoring data was made is made available, and that would show could be integrated into the risk assessment to identify, for example, in this picture here, that each of these green dots is an individual salmon lease, and that would indicate maybe some monitoring the risk of a compliance or non-compliance, and that would allow a manager at his fingertips to immediately see areas that might need a little bit more investigation, or other areas that were well within or a lower priority. So this was if you like, the level 2, the quantitative assessment, and it helps. So it synthesizes monitoring information that was coming in from all these different places into a regional picture. And then the level 3 risk assessments was looking at a whole range of scenarios of future development plans, looking at different diseases, or how industries might develop for the production of algal species, or filter mussel farms, or other industries. And these were synthesized into, if you like, an envelope of answers, so that to inform the managers then of the range of possible outcomes if they were to put a future development in a certain place and this situation occurred. And this was again led by Beth's team. I apologize that, as you probably noticed, some of the slides, the details on the slides are in Spanish. If you've got any burning questions about them, I can try to translate it, but some of the words are very similar, or the acronyms, and I hope you can grasp the content. So as well as the risk assessment, there was some strategic analysis and focus models that were built, and these dive deeper into particular topics of interest to the salmon industry. So so one of those was this benthic quality index. So this basically brought in together and synthesized a lot of the monitoring data into a sediment health metric. So if you like, maybe providing some sort of report card for benthic quality, and but this is an interactive system, so you could select, I think, the time frame, and then when new information become available, it would then become updated. So a really useful tool for industry to see, to articulate how the benthic habitat was performing under the various leases. Another detailed model was an epidemiological growth model. So in Chile, the salmon industry has experienced a number of different diseases, and they have the regulators have a large database on the incidence of these diseases. And the modeling team was able to produce a statistical model to predict, under certain conditions, the likelihood of an infection from these diseases and how that would develop through time. So these are modeling tools that then were made available through this dashboard to industry users and stakeholders, so that maybe at a certain time of year, if they would like to explore the incidence of, or at their farm location, the likelihood of a disease under certain management scenarios, they could have a play and use this knowledge to become better informed of the risks and of disease at their farm site. On top of this disease model, then was added also an economic model, and this allowed to take the next step of, if there was a disease outbreak at a farm, what would be the financial implications of continuing to farm and apply some medical treatments, or would it be more cost effective to either destroy the fish and start again somewhere else, or whether it would be more effective to wait just for a few weeks to fish the fish out at the market value, And this allowed the scenarios to be explored and bringing this tactical decision making really back to the basics of what's actually going on in the water and in the fish market at the time, and then back to help with the decision making process for the farmers. Finally, the other tool that was developed here was this whole of system modeling, and this is Beth's team. We were able to synthesize a lot of scenarios. It created a lot of scenarios about possible futures for this area, and look at both from all different angles, the social impact of various management decisions, the economic impact, and also the environmental impact. So the three aspects of sustainability. And then you can use this whole of systems modeling approach to see for the strategic planning for the future of how your decision would impact those three areas of sustainability. And the dashboard then provides us the visualization, a summary of this work, so that the managers can refer to it when they're planning their future and their future development of the area. Moving on to the part where my team was more involved, which was in the biogeochemical modeling and the modeling team. So as Louise described in her presentation, we developed a three-dimensional hydrodynamic biogeochemical model for the area. And this was to look at really the fundamental oceanography of the region and how that impacts the water quality for farming and for other industries and users. So the model was nested in a regional model, which was nested in a global model. It included 14 river catchment flows, and we validated the model against observations from moorings and from sites, and from in situ sites, from underway systems. There's a glider shown there, CSIRO glider. We took it over to Chile a few times, and also from remote sensing. And once the model, so at the end of Louise's presentation, there was a question about how do you determine whether it's fit for purpose. So my answer to that is you first of all, you describe the purpose of the model and say, well, the purpose of this model was to simulate the oceanography of the whole inland sea. So we were able to, in terms of reproducing seasonal cycles of temperature and salinity, and matching up with observations for the whole area. And so therefore that was our criteria, and we were then able to assess the model performance against the observations to see whether it met that criteria, and if it did, it was then fit for purpose, and we were able to continue to use it for our science. So the physics model did a good job of reproducing the observations, and then we were able to develop these analysis showing the seasonal summer circulations and winter circulations. And this model hadn't really been deployed here before in this way at this resolution. And for the first time, we were able to describe the system, and it's basically a giant, it's about 200 kilometers long, a giant shelf scale estuary. So the amount of rainfall coming in off the Andes keeps a freshwater layer and a strong stratification in the northern part of this basin, and the basin is then better mixed to the south. And then when you release passive traces at some of these locations, you can see from the residual circulations, they quickly move generally from north to south. And depending on the location and how they're swept by the currents, faster, or they spread out further, or have a tighter plume. So to this physics background, we added the CSIRO environmental model, which includes phytoplankton, zooplankton, nutrients, detritus and benthos, and the cycling of carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus and oxygen throughout those different functional groups. And why do we care about water quality? Well, we care about it because of fundamentally for the health of the fish. The fish need good access to good water quality and oxygen, but also because algal blooms and other contaminations can affect the other parts of the environment. So, and the fish farm play a role in this environment. Is they have used the environmental services of waste disposal from the fish farms in terms of dissolved and particulate substances, and those were input to the model as well. So people sometimes use these models to evaluate the different sources of nutrients to say whether the natural and anthropogenic supply, how they compare. And we can do those sorts of quantitative analysis with these model outputs. So we have data from the rivers, data from wastewater discharge locations, and also from the fish farms themselves. And the fish farms are all those little green dots. So there's lots of fish farm leases in this area. Once we'd set up the model, we again went through the validation process, looking at observations, in situ data, remote sensing, and the model was able to, with good statistical criteria, reproduced seasonal cycles over several years, and we found in the observed oceanographic parameters. I'd just like to add that for any model, if it hasn't been validated at a certain scale or for a certain specific parameter, the model actually forms a consistent hypothesis with the parts of the model that have been validated, but it is only a hypothesis of a system, and that must be taken into account when we're making decisions based on the model. So if you really care about something, it's best to get some good observations to check that the model is accurate before making a very expensive decision. This is just an example. We found that the phosphorus supply was critical to the simulation of algal blooms. As previously mentioned, the stratified conditions in the north tended to provide result in subsurface chlorophyll blooms, lower algal biomass in surface waters, whereas in the south it was more well mixed. So once you've developed these models, then we can do some connectivity analysis using the currents. And this is particularly useful if you want to look at how maybe diseases or particles might move from one, in this industry-focused application, from one salmon lease to the next. And in Chile, the salmon leases are measured, managed in neighborhood areas and then in regional areas. So we were able to look at this connectivity metrics for the different scales of the neighborhoods. So using the example, the same example that Louise talked about, the presence of a sea lice, Beck's team released particles that resembled sea lice in their behavior and movement in the water and their buoyancy, and in each of the neighborhood regions, and then looked at calculated the connectivity of each neighborhood region with each other neighborhood region. So, and they did this for many different time periods of the hindcast simulation to provide a summary metric which was valid for across the years that have been simulated. So I'll just show you here how that looked for about, this is for a neighborhood with a high dispersal. And you can see the particles were seeded in this area, but they are quickly spreading into other neighborhoods. So these particles, which resemble the behavior of sea lice, and they're quickly spreading throughout these other neighborhoods. This is a neighborhood with a low dispersal index, and the particles or the sea lice that were maybe the particles that resemble sea lice that were spread from here are really being retained in this area and not going too far, maybe only into the nearest neighborhoods. So, and this is the same analysis in case the movies didn't work, but for an individual lease site. So this is particles released from a specific farm site, and particles with a high connectivity, and particles released from a specific farm site with a low dispersive connectivity. So this is due to the basic oceanography of the region. And when you complete the analysis, you can use these, if you like, out degree analysis, which shows a super source. So it shows that these neighborhoods quickly disperse particles from these neighborhoods would disperse to many places. So this might be important to know if you're planning a new development. In contrast, these neighborhoods here are super sinks. So the particles that are distributed from some of these other neighborhoods will all were highly connected into these areas. So they would often go into the red ones and the pale salmon colored regions. So this is information that might fundamental information from if you were proposing a new development, you maybe would shy away from putting a new lease in an area that was vulnerable to infection from many other locations, or you might shy away from putting a new lease in an area that was likely to infect many other locations. I'm just going to talk now briefly about how we delivered this data to managers and stakeholders in the who was using this platform. So first of all, there was these interactive tools in the Data Explorer. So you could build up a picture from the different various data sources in the dashboard, which could draw on. So you could add the leases, you could add your model layers, remote sensing, temperature, seawater velocity, nutrients or oxygen concentrations. So here we've added seawater velocity and onto the map, and you can see how the currents move around in this part of the model domain. You could then put some little pins on your data map to show the time series of how, and this is temperature, how temperature would vary at these lease locations. These are orange dots are all the salmon leases in this area. So you could look in maybe at those specific locations, how they would change over a seasonal cycle. And it's possible here to zoom in to, if you're not interested in seasons, to look at the particular week of your interest. And then you could also look at a pin drop to look at the vertical profile of the water quality at their location, so, or at one of your lease locations. And here it shows a beautiful chlorophyll here, algal bloom at about 12 meters depth at this particular time. And you could also put multiple pins in and see what was going on in the water column, or you could look at dissolved oxygen at your farm site. This figure shows oxygen concentration, as I said, or dissolved oxygen at this location, and the seasonal cycle in dissolved oxygen at that location. And you can select the depth layer you're interested in to see what conditions you might expect from the model output. So this is allows an interface for a non-expert user to really get into the model output and quickly visualize something that's relevant to them, relevant to their lease or to their management role, and really have a look at what's going on. So once Another aspect of the reporting is that Zona Pesca was receiving weekly data from each lease location, and they needed a way to synthesize that data into reports and integrate it maybe with other information about the weather, about the seasonal cycle, about the model, which the model could provide. So the platform provided a way to produce these interactive graphs, and then to in multiple styles, or their if you like, the style they were used to for compliance monitoring. It would allow them quickly to integrate the data up for the whole region, for individual neighborhoods, for individual lease farm sites. And this might be data associated with compliance, with monitoring, water quality. It could be fish kills, it could be the occurrence of disease, whatever the manager was responsible for. They could take that data out of this system. This is just an example again of when you went to making a report. You could bring up a map which would show the leases. It would show which leases were occupied, which ones were fallowed, which ones had been granted. It could also show up salmon leases and also mussel farms and some of the seaweed farms that were operating in the area as well. And this is a technical plot, but it's to remind me to tell you that all of these interrogation of the data or the database was all user configurable. So a new inquiry could be built and saved by someone who wanted to, I don't know, look at the incidence of a fish disease at the same time as a temperature, a specific temperature range, or bring together a previously a combination of data that hadn't been done, and that could be saved, and then that report could be run multiple times. And this is just an example of some of the connectivity analysis and maybe some other data that's been brought in together to provide a synthesis. So the dashboard provides the ability to produce these quick summaries for rapid reporting, and this could be delivered to your mobile device, your handheld tablet or something, and to delivered to the farm lease location, which were often very remote, or total access. So you could really drill down into the information system and pull out, make a new query to make a specific report. And I'm just going to end now with a sort of, if you like, a example investigation that someone might put together. So this is the neighborhood, and there may be a farm here that has a particular condition that wants to be investigated. So you could look at that situation. So you might want to run a connectivity dispersal run to see maybe if there was a disease outbreak here, where would that disease go, which other farms you should be ringing up and telling them that there was something on the way. And when you put all that information together, this is the sort of interactive figure that's at the fingertips of these managers who have access to this SIMA platform. Now, in case I didn't make this clear, this whole modeling system works in near real time with a forecast of a few days, depending on the weather forecast that's available. So it really was a tactical response modeling system. So if there was a disease outbreak at this farm here, this is maybe how it might, was the model suggested it might spread. These are the there were levels of connectivity between these farm sites, specifically lines of inquiry, but they were the nearest neighbors. Therefore, you might like to contact those, immediately identify those people to be contacted to check or keep an eye out for this spread of disease or whatever was going on here. Someone asked if there was something about oil spills. Again, it was actually used to look at some of the movement of an oil spill, how it might compromise which farms would be compromised in the next week or so. So this is a list of most of the the key people who are involved in this research, and I'm happy to attempt to field any questions you've got and about this piece of work. It was really a fantastic piece of work, and it's a privilege to be in this team and to be able to bring some of this expertise back to Tasmania now, to the industry here in Australia.
Thanks, Karen. That was really comprehensive, and I think gave people a sense of what the SIMA system can do. At least one question's come in. It says, very nice modelling work and talk. Can your models give insights about the occurrence of red tides in the Chiloé region, as happened in 2016 when there was a big mortality event there?
A great question. So our model, we do distinguish multiple plankton species or groups, but they're modeled as sort of populations, and we don't specifically have one that we can distinguish dinoflagellates from diatoms-ish, but I think for the red tide work, there was a parallel project led by another group that was using remote sensing, and they were able to distinguish the pigments accurately with the spectral capability of the remote sensing to identify the movement of algal blooms. And there would be an opportunity to integrate that work with the models. And then if you had a good initial conditions to do in a sort of a data assimilating way, to then show the movement of maybe a patch of a known algal bloom that had been identified by another mechanism. So if you had some real-time observations, you could then model those moving forwards to show where an algal bloom might move, or whether it might be prolonged or grow and flourish. So we could provide some information there if that would be useful, but we didn't explore that in this project. It was another thing we could do.
Thanks. Another question's come in, Karen. Can you give some idea of the scale of the costs involved, and what kind of groups of organisations involved in that funding, what the ongoing costs are like? So basically the build cost and then the legacy maintenance cost going on.
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to ask for that. I did see that, I thought Andy Stevens was online. I think we were up in the between 9 to 11 million dollars. I don't know, Beth, if you have better information about that aspect of the project. The project, I believe, was funded through
the Latin Development Bank, so the Chilean government. So to answer the question, it was a multi-million-dollar effort across that whole big team, not just the biogeochemical bit. That whole big production effort cost on the order of $5 to $10 million. Andy's been elevated, so he can probably answer this question directly himself in a second. But the Latin Development Bank fed the Chilean government to help speed up that development. Andy, do you want to take over answering this question?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I was just writing something in the chat, but in summary, it was a grant through the Inter-American Bank to the Chilean government for $8 million US, which was what it took for us to do a large part of the work. Some of it was also with the host agency as well to do a number of other components of the work. So we were one of several projects that was really developed to assist the aquaculture industry through the regulator, SUNAPESCA. So, in terms of the ongoing operating costs, it's really hosting the model as well as the information system on a server that's outside of SUNAPESCA. I couldn't really tell you what the costs internally for SUNAPESCA are. Certainly there was, I guess the key messages are, start early, obviously. We needed to do quite a bit of work around just working out how they made decisions to develop a system that they wanted. And then they needed to bring people on that we could train and developed so that they could take over the running of the day-to-day information platform as opposed to just the models themselves. I hope that's answered your question.
Thanks, Andy. That was really helpful. I think for those out there who are thinking about it, it's not necessarily something an individual industry member would take up. This was something that could feed the entire industry, and that's kind of the approach that's happened in Australia around things like e-reefs as well, where it's across a broader regional, national kind of initiative rather than being a cost that any one industry player is expected to maintain. In terms of the biogeochemistry, Karen, what kind of ongoing input do you need to have to keep the models on track and not, drifting with time?
Great question. Really, I think it needs the expert oversight of a modeler to keep checking that when data sets come in, often the in situ data sets are hindcast because it takes some time to be analyzed in a lab and put through a system. So then you need to go back and make sure that your model was reproducing last year's seasonal cycle still accurately, in case it needs a reinitialization, in case the boundary condition is not is allowing, for example, on a model of this scale, you could allow a system-wide drawdown of nitrogen over multiple years, and you need to make sure that the model's being, just staying on track and not allowing to develop a bias, and that's normal for a model of this nature. And for the global models, they often need this bias correction over time. So yeah, I think it needs a source of data to check that the model is accurate, and then also an expert user just to be able to pick up if things are no longer appropriate, the simulation is drifting, and the model then becomes no longer fit for purpose.
Thanks. So I don't know if Louise is still around as well, but potentially if anyone's got any questions for any of the group, that would be great. While we're waiting for anyone to be able to maybe type something in, I'm going to ask each of you if there was one thing that you think that biogeochemical models could deliver to the CRC or to an industry partner that we currently don't necessarily do very well in Australia. What do you think that is?
I missed my thank you slide at the end. Karen has reminded me, so I've just popped it up to say thank you for the large group of organisations, particularly the collaborative ones that have helped in developing biogeochemical models. But I like your question, Beth, so I'm going to mute so that we can get an answer.
So either one of you can answer, so just dive in.
So can I go first? What I think, which we're not doing at the moment, which we could do better, I think is multi-scale applications. So real downscaling from regional to local bays, and then down to fish farms. I think we can do that a lot better. There's now we have innovations in the physics to allow that to happen across one single grid. But we also need this multi-scale model calibration. If you want to use a model for the purpose of exploring gradients in nutrients across a few hundred meters, you need to have a data set that can show you that the model is performing accurately across a few hundred meters, so that you can be sure that your model is good like that. So we need to then couple our model, our vision for using these models with the new observing tech that's out there. So things like gliders, autonomous systems, underway nutrient analyzers on boats that can do mapping better, oxygen probes that can be towed or put on autonomous vehicles, so that we can really generalize, be sure that the model's working okay, and then we can generalize the results across other seasons or regions or forecast scenarios or whatever. So yeah, better integration with observations, and very much more multi-scale. So we're really getting down to the things people care about.
I would have answered exactly the same there, Karen. It's about the multi-scale. It's being able to do something at the small scale right out around a diffuser, or right underneath your farms, your fish farms, as well as being able to say, well, what is that doing to the wild salmon, 5 kilometres upstream? Because these are the kind of questions that one answered. Having modelling tools that will go from that small scale all the way to that big is actually a really big challenge. But the second one is so important in terms of getting it right. And there was a question there, and I'm sorry, because I answered it, jumped into the already answered, Karen, because it was actually for you, and it was about what, about the importance and the quality of the monitoring data, because you said it so well when you said, if you love something, make sure you monitor and understand it. And I think it's, yes, getting the right monitoring data and get the right understanding of your system, but also, and this is where the modelling industry is so challenged, is the sort of using those high performance computers and cloud computes and GPUs or whatever it is, whatever it takes to do proper calibration, so the auto calibrations, your genetic algorithms, your MCMC, your prediction of uncertainty. So when you're predicting different responses in terms of particularly your nutrient cyclings, your algal blooms, you're predicting with a level of uncertainty, and you just keep improving that, reducing that uncertainty every time you get more knowledge, more data, and you drive that into that data assimilation process. So that's the big thing for me, is to just improve the predictability by reducing uncertainty.
I thought of another answer as well, Beth, when I was, as Louise was just talking, is that we definitely have an opportunity with the biogeochemical models now to better synthesize our model predictions with the risk assessment tools, with the production tools. I mean, and I've showed that with the Chile examples. But that's something that we haven't necessarily brought back in a consistent way into the Australian framework here yet. And there's definitely an ability to use the models more in the production, the management of production and the risk assessments and things. So there's an opportunity there that I don't think has been realised here. But exactly how that would play out depends very much. I'm not sure whether that's a sort of a research project to start with, to see how that can be used first, before looking, really whether it can be done before it can be rolled out to stakeholders.
So one last question from me. Do you see any fundamental differences? Is it easier or harder to do something with energy or with aquaculture, given that the CRC works with both industries? We've heard a bit more at the environmental aquaculture side of things, I guess, in the two talks today, but are there any impediments that you can see of in using it in the energy space, or there's just not as many examples there yet?
There are, so I guess my sort of very, very base answer is, because the renewables is focused on the physics and the aquaculture includes a lot of the biology and nutrients, you're actually moving from one level of complexity to the next. So in theory, and this is just in theory, the renewable side of things is easier, there's less uncertainty involved there. But this exactly the same processes that both Karen and I have been talking about apply to the renewables in terms of that near real-time forecasting, so that you are changing your operation to reorientate your blades of your turbines, you're changing your the timing again, or your orientation of your tidal generators, all those sorts of things in response. But they're more in response in terms of the physics. The biogeochemistry for that is more things like you've got your biofouling, those sorts of things. So that's where I think it comes into there. But there's also a lot of movement towards having combined, particularly since a lot of offshore oil and gas has been converted into both renewable and aquaculture. There's a big push that way. that you're going to have it all integrated anyway. So the same models will be doing both. So I think that's, yeah, I think the answer is I would say, you know, the aquaculture is more complex, but it's not to say that there's probably more, actually thinking about it, the physics is better understood. There's less uncertainty in your parameterization, but the precision, there you go. So the precision. So my answer is both. I'm not going to go one way or the other, because the precision, when you're trying to understand about your energy production and renewables, you have to really know that you have to have really high precision models helping you there. So yeah, I'll take away my answer that was leaning towards aquaculture and saying both.
The only other thing I would add to what Louise has said is there's potential for obviously the models can predict water quality in terms of oxygen concentration, and if a structure would fundamentally impede flow or modify the availability of oxygen to a different industry that needs oxygen, that should be taken into account. Also, the biogeochemical models has the potential to simulate biofouling on the energy infrastructure. So if the energy infrastructure involves a lot of moving parts, or things that could be compromised by fouling organisms, potentially there's some insights that a biogeochemical model could play in terms of the growth of fouling organisms, seasonal exposures, and that might factor into risk assessments of or economic assessments of how often you have to go out and clean the structure or replace parts due to the biofouling. So there's a potential opportunity there to use the models in a slightly different way than what we've done before. I should also mention that our models, some structures when placed on the seafloor can modify sediment distributions. So if that was the case, then you might have to think very carefully about, you know, if sediment, you know, if you had some sort of a jetty or pilings, whether there'll be erosion type models, which is a slightly different area than what we've been talking about today, but it's also definitely critical to the engineering community.
I'm guessing thermal gradient energy generation, bringing up the cold water and that kind of stuff is another whole area we could discuss at another time, but I think we've had a good run today. So I'd like to thank you both for truly excellent talks and introductions to the topic. Thank you for coming along. And I'd just like to note that the next CRC webinar is on Wednesday, the 21st of April on multi-purpose platform and co-location of aquaculture and wind farms, which we started to touch on there at the very end. So that was a terrific segue by both. If anyone's interested in hearing that webinar, please go to the CRC events page to register. Otherwise, thank you both. I think you've done a terrific job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you to the CRC for providing this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.